Yo, it's Guido coming at you with a tactics talk and a review of the Italian Tier 5 P.43, which is their Tier 5 medium tank in the new Italian line. I free XP'd up to the Tier 5. I unlocked all the modules with free XP. I put in a crew, a 100% crew, and off I went to grind onto the Tier 6. So as with most of my reviews, what we'll do is a quick overview, talk about the tech tree. We'll do a comparison between the P43 and the rest, not the rest because there are quite a few actually Tier 5 mediums, but we'll look at a sampling of the tech tree types. We'll look at my setup, we'll look at my stats after I got done with the grind, and then we've got about 3 games. We'll go over and look at gameplay for the Italian P43 Tier 5 medium tank. Starting with the overview, you can see I've got it here in my garage. Looks like a pretty standard Tier 5 medium tank, and actually as you look through with the other mediums that I have in my garage, it's roughly the same size as pretty much all of them. So nothing amazing there. The Sherman tends to be one of the tallest ones in there. So pretty much the same size. It looks a lot like the Panzer T25 as far as the shape goes of it. This was a blueprint tank. The first tank you'll find that was actually produced in the Italian line is back at Tier 4, the one before this. Everything past is blueprints, and I believe it was either the Tier 8 or the 9. I think it's the 9 was actually built as a prototype, but only 2 examples. So everything past this tank and past this tank is going to be like a blueprint or a design kind of thing. The armor is interesting. Tanks.gg, I usually show that, but they do not have the 3D model in there yet. They've got all the details and numbers, but not the 3D model. The armor is decent up front. We'll take a look at that when we get to the comparison. I want to say it's 80 millimeters, but you can see it's got some strange angles in here. If you put a little angle on them like any tank, you can get some decent bounces. It's a relatively slow tank, which we'll get into, and the armor profile is odd, but it is usable to some extent at tier and especially below tier. It can be a little bit surprising for a medium tank. The gun is fairly high up on the turret, and the turret is decently armored also. So as far as a ridge poker at Tier 5, which take that with a grain of salt, but as far as that goes at Tier 5, it is fairly capable with a -10 depression, and we'll talk about all that information in just a minute. But there it is, the P.43 Tier 5 tank. We'll move on to the tech tree considerations. There are several important things you want to realize on the tech tree here. You'll see that, and I've got it blocked off, but the Tier 1 tank down here goes to 2 tanks. That's an interesting decision. I don't know if that means they're planning on having a second line at some point, but what you need to know about this is kind of important. The L640, which is this one here, only has 2 crew. The M1441 has 4 crew, which will be in the correct configuration up to the P2640. So if you go from the Tier 2 to the Tier 3 to the Tier 4, you will have a commander, driver, radio operator, and loader. Realize that when you switch from the P2640 to the P43, over here it will go to a more standard later kind of configuration of commander, gunner, driver, loader. From the P43 all the way to the Progetto 65, it will be the commander, gunner, driver, loader. So you're going to have to reorganize your crew a little bit, moving from the Tier 4, which is the P2640 right here, up to the P43. Something to think about. If you decide to go through the L640 line, you're going to have to actually add 2 crew. Now, is that a huge big deal? One of the reasons I free experience up to Tier 5 is because the grind from Tier 1 to 4 can be done in an afternoon. And if you're planning on stepping a crew through all of that, you're going to spend a lot of gold. And more than likely, even if you went with the 80% credit one, you probably would not get that crew back to 100% on their basic qualification by the time you got done grinding the tank. I don't really recommend dragging crews through all these lower tiers. That's one of the reasons I start at 5. And even at 5, it didn't take me that many battles to get to 6. But I did get the crew moving along because I bought them at 100%. That's going to all be to taste. You can do it the way you want. I don't play Tier 4 and below for the most part, so it's not an issue for me because I bought a 100% crew at Tier 5. Just understand that when you transition from 4 to 5, you've got that issue, and down at this one Tier 2 tank, for some reason, not for some reason, that's just how it's designed, there's 2 guys in that one and there's 4 in the M1441. I just think that's something you need to think about and pre-plan so you're not surprised. Other than that, all the modules are fairly straightforward. There seems to be a few more choices on this one, unlike some of the newer lines that came in where there was really just one module and another module. They expanded the modules, it seems like, a little bit on the Italian line. Tanks have more multiple module choices, usually relating to the turret and the gun, than tanks before it. But I didn't notice anything wacky, at least up to tier 5, that is anything to worry about too much. Let's move on to the comparison. Here we have the comparison. I have a selection of tier 5 medium tanks from various nations, and including one premium tank at the end, the Panzer T-25. The rest of them are tech tree tanks. We'll start at the top right here. Firepower, you can see its number is pretty low. That's the number that Wargaming gives. The overall stats and how they calculate, I couldn't tell you that. You'll notice, though, that the T-34s have quite a large number as compared to the rest. Otherwise, it's comparable to the rest as far as it goes. So 110 average damage, the T-34s at 85. You can see the Sturbs at 150. Quite a range, actually, of damage in there, but it's right in the middle. The penetration is decent near the top. Not quite as good as the Skoda, but right up there. So the standard round penetration is actually pretty nice as far as the gun goes. Rate of fire is decent, not great. Right in the middle, I would say, right there. Reload time at 3.93. Again, right in the middle, nothing to write home about. Come down here to turret traverse is fine. We look at the gun depression, -10 is quite usable. A lot of these tanks have really good gun depression. I didn't realize the Sturb was at -15, that's crazy. But it's got -10. One thing I thought that was odd that I looked in here, the T-34 and the Type T-34, basically the exact same tank, except that for some reason the Chinese version only gets a -5 depression. Okay. Odd. Aiming time's at 2.3. Not great, but it is right in the middle with the rest of these tanks. None of them have great aiming times at tier 5. Dispersion is abysmal. Add the long aim time to the big dispersion there, and you've got kind of a wonky gun that takes a lot of care in order to be effective. But when you get down here, this is where you start to see how ridiculous the T-34s are at 2300 DPM, whereas the P.43 sits at 1679, which is right in the middle of the rest of them. Not nearly as bad as a Skoda down there, but certainly not as good as the Type or the T-34 up above there. For survivability, this is probably where they're trying to balance this tank, as the gun is wonky and not great. We'll get to the mobility in a minute. It's not great. In theory, this tank's about its armor. When you look down, you'll notice it's one of the heaviest tier 5 mediums, and it's got 80 hull, and it's got 80 on the face of the turret. Ties with the Panzer III-4 on the hull and wins out on the turret. Is that necessarily useful down here, considering the pen values of most of these tanks plus gold? A little bit. I'm going to show you a couple examples where the armor is actually kind of interesting, especially at tier or versus lower tier, and occasionally versus higher tier. But it's not like it's a Type 5 or Type 4 where you're poking out and going, you know what, I have a reasonable expectation of bouncing. It's more of an angling thing, and maybe just a few lucky bounces, especially against lower tier guys who are just trying to pop out and hit you without really thinking about where they're aiming, that kind of thing. So a slow medium. As we get down here, you'll notice that its speed is at 42, which is the slowest in the class, at least amongst these that we're comparing. That's because it's got a 430 horsepower engine, and it's super heavy at 30, whereas the rest of them are down in the mid 20s and even lower. Traverse speed is decent right there. And concealment, all these tanks are relatively stealthy. Nothing really to write home there. The view range is 350, which is low. And that is an issue for tier 5 tanks, especially if they're taking on 7s or something like that. They can have a lot of trouble with their view range. They can't really see that far. Even though it's a medium, it's not that great on the view range. So usually what I do here is, what are you going to hang your hat on with this tank? Well, in theory, it's balanced by being a relatively heavily armored medium. Unfortunately, it's only got 110 damage per shot gun, which is about the same as the rest of them at that tier. I haven't looked at any derps, and I haven't put any derps on these tanks that we're comparing with, so that does change things a little bit on what you might do with this tank. Tier 5 tanks, not necessarily this one. So it's supposed to be kind of the armored medium, and that's kind of the surprise, I guess, that you're going to give the enemy. That's really not much to hang your hat on at tier 5, and because you're going to see so many tier 6 and 7s that are just going to shred that armor, it is probably a fairly weak balancing item, and I would say the gun really lets the tank down at the end of the day. But we will see how it actually works in some pub matches. Let's move on to the setup. For my setup, you'll see that I am carrying the medium caliber gun rammer. I have improved vents and the enhanced gun laying drive. This does not have a vertical stabilizer for it, so the ELG is, or EGL is what you're going to want. I am carrying 44 AP. I actually have a lot of APCR, just based on what I was talking about, looking at the comparison, that you're probably going to need some more penetration when you're seeing 6s and 7s quite often, and a couple HE. HE at that caliber of gun is almost useless, but I carry so many other, it's just there just in case that seems to be a last-ditch thing I can do. I have a small repair kit, small first aid kit, and a large fire extinguisher. I did not have any problems being lit on fire with this, although I only played 20 battles. There's a possibility there of running food, and that would certainly help with the wonky gun handling, so that is definitely on the table if you want to try the food route. As far as the crew goes, I bought a 100% gold crew, and they got to about 60 to 70%, I'd say, on their first skill. That crew I have moved into the tier 6, and these are them right here. So you can see they're up to 80% now as I've played a few games in the P.43 BIS, which is the tier 6 tank. And I did that transfer. Remember, like I said, from the tech tree, from 4 to 5, that's where the crews change. From 5 to 6, they're the same slots as far as being a commander, gunner, driver, and loader right there. And that's pretty much the setup. What I have going on is I'm training situational awareness. I am training snapshot. I have smooth ride and repairs on the loader right there. Pretty standard, really. There's an argument to be made if you want to spend gold to do something else useful, like maybe some of the spotting skills, recon, or situational awareness, whichever one goes with the commander. I believe it's recon. And then switch over to 6 cents when it gets to 100%. I just didn't feel like paying the gold on that, and it's tier 5 and 6, so who cares? I'll just deal with that slight loss of capability until I get to 100% on the 6 cents. And that's pretty much the setup on there. We can now move on to the stats. So how have I done in this tank? You can see I have a whole 20 battles, so this is a very low sample size. Managed a 50% so far. Was actually only 50% because I was down at 38%. Not too long before I got done grinding it. But you'll notice I've got 655 average experience on the per battle on that. Come up here to the stats, 65% hits. That's kind of low, and that's going to be a bit of a problem with this tank. You're going to find that you've got to get close to your work, and that's not really what you want to do with the medium. So that wonky gun is really going to limit a little bit of your medium to long range fighting. 1.94 damage, 2.17 destruction. Interesting armor use efficiency for a medium at 0.61. I've said it before, you get up to about a 1, somewhere in the 0.9 to 1. That's actually a pretty well-armored tank. This thing is decent, depending on who it sees, as I noted. I talked about the experience. Damage is 729, damage received at 376, assisted at 178. Notice the vehicle spotted is a 1.75. That's pretty high and probably speaks to more of a YOLO, let's get our experience mentality in those 20 games than anything. Let's compare it, though, to my Type T-34, which I did very well in at 67% wins and 108 battles. If you click on that, you'll notice that my damage and destruction went up, although my damage caused went down. It would be interesting to see where I am after 100 battles on the P-43 and see if it is similar to the Type T-34. You'll notice, though, that the T-34 has the same kind of wonky gun, and it's only at 67.91% hit, so that's just something you're going to deal with at a tier 5 medium with those not super accurate guns. I was fascinated to see that this thing sits at 0.42 armor efficiency. The Type and the T-34 basic one, the Russian one, actually have decent armor for their tier, and the P-43 has even better. So you will surprise some people on occasion with that, but so far done a pretty decent job in this, despite only having 50% low sample size on 20 battles. It will be interesting to see if I ever get to 100 where it gets to, but it's on par with the rest of my tier 5 medium tanks. So win rate is not really a big issue there as long as everything else is more or less the same. So that's how I did. Let's move on to some games and I'll show you a few examples of how to play this tank. Here's our first example on Erlenberg, top tier in a 2-tier battle. So in a 5-10, spawned into the north on a defense. It's an assault map. We're on the defensive side, and I'm going to go over to the east side. We got quite a crowd coming up the middle, so I'm going to come up here and start looking for spots. You'll see a large chunk of my team is going to go hide in the bushes back behind, which is pretty much what happens on this map. Just as an aside, if you want to have a good game on this map, I suggest you go about where I am and start looking for guys. You're going to get lights. You do have to be careful about them coming up on the hill to the left right there. So be careful about poking out too much. But you'll get lights for all those morons in the back who want to sit there and hide in the bush and snipe. And that is experience for you for spotting damage. So looking around for a shot, you'll notice the decent depression. I'm able to use this hill right here pretty well. Come over to the middle and look for these guys. Now this is tricky. The spots where you can hit them are kind of in between buildings, and they're really covered up pretty well. They have to kind of make a mistake and poke out if you're going to get any shots on their side. You can see that they're in the middle of that fight with several of ours. Our Churchill one is in there kind of clogging up that area. Got a Kehoe over here. And right off the bat, we're starting to lose 3-1. I didn't really see anything. I didn't take any hits from guys up on the hill. There's a little Kehoe over here, so I'm going to just push into this dude and see if I can't take him down. Depression lets me down a little bit there. I don't have quite enough. Sort of chasing this guy, and then, oh geez, that's a problem. That guy has a big gun, so I dodge out right out of the way from him. And the Kehoe's coming over here. Let's climb up this little hill. I've covered myself up to the SARL thing, whatever that is, the French tank TD with the massive gun. And now I'm just looking for a shot here. There's a bounce. So that's kind of what that armor does for you right there. Trying to see if I can even get a shot on this guy, and I just can't quite figure out where he is. Hammered by the M37. No amount of armor really is going to help you against artillery, so I'll come off the hill. And I'm going to go look for this French TD in here. I know he's up on this side. Bit of a dangerous move here because I'm in between the two of them. I don't notice him soon enough. I'm looking all around. I'm like, oh geez, there he is. So I get really, really lucky that he misses right there. Good news is this thing reloads relatively quickly. And it looks like he actually tried to shoot me while moving, so got lucky twice there against him. Something you will find at lower tiers. Sometimes the wonky guns just miss. And of course I'm spamming gold because I'm a noob. That's just a personal decision you're going to have to make. I wanted to get through this as fast as possible. If you're running a premium account like I am, you run reserves, and you shoot some gold, you're going to get through your tanks a lot faster if you're looking to grind. If you're looking to just enjoy the tanks of the game, then there's that personal decision. Do I want to spam a bunch of gold, or do I want to give myself a challenge, or whatever the reasons are that you may or may not run with gold. I'm not even sure if this guy sees me. He's kind of pointing my direction. He's getting lit by the P.43 over there. Finally get a shot in him. You'll notice how long it takes to kind of zoom in. It's about the same amount of time it takes for you to reload. So if you're just sitting still firing, you can get a shot. Unfortunately, I moved, so that hurt me a little bit. And as it zooms in, the timing's just about right. So you can shoot, and as you reload, it'll zoom back in, provided you don't move, and you'll be fully zoomed by about the time you're ready to shoot again. Again, if you don't move. So a lot of their guys are there in the middle. I've got to go start rooting them out of that middle area right there. Got rid of their arty. That is a decision you have to make. A lot of times you'll see guys win a flank and they'll just push back there into the enemy's spawn point, especially on a defense like this. I'm going to assume this guy doesn't move. And he doesn't. But if you can get back there and you have a relatively fast tank, you can get back there, you can kill their arty or whatever that might be in the back and get back to your cap, then by all means go ahead and do it. But if it's going to take you a long time, or there's a bunch of TDs back there, something that's going to get you anchored and unable to move back to the cap, then don't do it. The other good news I have here is I've got several guys down there keeping them lit and keeping them busy. And you've seen the crazy accuracy on this gun a couple times here. There's 2 shots that go right in. Earlier, a couple shots that missed, but they were only showing me a turret. I'll move up to get a little bit closer. Where is that KV-1S? The P-2640 is behind me, but he's busy with our P-2640. This is the threat over here, especially if he's running the derp. He can start taking guys out right and left if they're not able to pin him. These guys want to be careful and not be seen by that guy, or not seen necessarily, but hit. It looks like he's tracked, or he's just happy to sit there, so we'll just go ahead and shoot at him. I got just a sliver of his turret. Let it zoom all the way in. There we go. Got some shots on him. There's another one. Unknown why they haven't gone to finish him off. Couldn't tell you. And they're going to take him down right here. And that's the end of that. So you'll see decent mobility. Not fast, like I said, but enough to get around. Enough to get around. There are some heavies, like the Excelsior, that are almost as fast as you are, if not as fast as you are. So that is a bit of a bummer. I will say that at Tier 5, the difference between a medium and a heavy in some cases is not much. They're kind of the same tank. There's a hit point pull difference to some extent, but it really does sort of blur the lines with this tank, with the amount of armor that it has and its speed. It's sort of a heavium at Tier 5 for whatever that's worth. Worth about 0 against Tier 6s and 7s, but at tier like this and lower tiers, it really fights as a heavium, to be quite honest. So it can get to the flanks, it can get back if it needs to, provided you're not really pressed for time. The gun is okay, you're only dropping 110 per shot, and it really does need to be zoomed all the way in, so it's going to benefit from careful gunnery. For the most part, snapshots are going to kind of be a crapshoot for you. And the last thing is you saw the armor actually held up against at least one shot at 75. I got some more interesting examples, though, about the armor coming up, so let's move on to those. So here we are in Paris for the second example, and as I loaded into this bottom tier in a 2-tier battle, I'm seeing some of the big guns up there. You got a KV-2, Firefly, Churchill, not a big gun, but fires quickly, big heavy, BDR with a pretty good gun. So lots of good guns, and this is a brawling map down here on the south. Could have went up to the north to the field, but that's a sideshow. The field usually doesn't matter unless it can be swept very quickly, and in a pub match, rarely does that happen. So I'm going to take my gun and my 17 gold rounds, and I'm going to come down here and see what I can do to help the big kids fight. So let's watch how the armor on this thing can sometimes work. And one of my goals on this particular game was, all right, so I'm in this city map. I know it's going to be kind of a brawl. I'm going to go help where they brawl. Let me see what I can do with the armor on this thing. Let's see if it actually holds up, if it can side scrape, if it's actually useful in any manner. So that guy is looking at me. They've got both sides of that building sort of held up right there. And you can see that with a little bit of the right move, you can kind of bounce some things. So I'm eating stuff with the tracks, I'm bouncing, I'm missing like crazy. I'm doing the same thing to him. There's a pin. So the smaller tank, my counterpart, is back behind there. Finally get a gold round through this guy's plate here. And another bounce, aiming at the upper plate, and of course I'm down a lot of hit points now, so I bounced 3,000 or 330. 3,000 would be amazing, but it's not. And I've done 229. By all rights, I should be dead by now. We got that big guy, and holy cow, I just auto bounced based on angle an AP round from a KV-2. Got him just poking out. Because there's 2 and they reload so relatively quick, I really didn't want to come out there with the front of my tank and get tracked and then eaten alive right there. Battle's still going on down low. I'm right here just trying to keep them honest up top. Somebody hits him. KV-2 is on fire. So let's go use this guy. And we'll take a shot into that dude, and we'll take another shot. And using the carcass of the tank here, I end up bouncing, trying to get into this guy. He gets into my track, and I take him down. So I'm up to 1,140 bounced. Bounced or soaked up via the tracks, right? So it's not all just the armor on this thing. It's knowledge of angling, a little bit of luck on the KV2 to where I was just able to get the right auto bounce angle on that guy's AP round. And we'll keep on pushing, and things are starting to look good now. I've got a 43 BIS over here, which is my older brother. He's sitting there looking at me. He's content to just sit. So again, into the track, a little over angled. Not really what I wanted to have happen right there. Didn't scratch him. If he'd have just side scraped out, he could have killed me off. I'll track him. I'm just going to try to aim right in. No, not that one. Bad angle. Should have gone to the little flat plate there. There we go. We're finally able to defeat him. A couple bad decisions on my part as far as where to aim. You'll notice that the gun, the wonky gun, even at that range, there's quite a large dispersion circle. So even though I'm right there, punching him right in the face, sometimes it is hard to hit exactly where you're aimed. Unfortunately, the one time I aimed at that bad spot to aim on the turret, I hit exactly into it. That highly angled, kind of pointed down area right there. If I'd have gone into the flat plate, I'd have been a lot better off right there, and we end up winning this. Only 719, but ended up bouncing 1,250. Do I think you're going to bounce that much all the time? No. 750 of it was off of one AP round from the KV2, but fighting it right, the armor is interesting. I wouldn't rely on it, but it can do things like that on occasion, which will surprise people in a medium. Let's move on to the third example. For the third example, another interesting example of using the armor. As we load in here, I'm top tier in a 2-tier battle. So there's me, 5 tier 5s, 10 tier 4s on each side. We have loaded into Abbey on the south spawn, and I'm headed over to the west side. You'll notice that I don't have a whole lot of help. I've got one M4 and one Type 95, some guys camping, and our Churchill 3 and several others are headed up the east side. Typical low tier battle. People really don't have a good idea what they're doing. Quite a few dudes stacked up in the middle. So what do I know as I come in here? Just from an analysis standpoint on the game, when I started this, I looked at it and went, well, we got a platoon, a top tier platoon of tier 5s over on the other side. We do not have a platoon, which has a Matilda, 2 types of Matildas, and a Panzer T-25. And I'm thinking, well, probably all 3 of those guys will show up in the same spot, and I'm expecting them to come rolling up the east side. So I do want to be very careful. Sorry, the west side, not the east side. So I do want to be very careful about being caught out with them. This thing has decent enough speed that I think I can get up here and look for a free shot, but I am pretty much immediately going to run away when I get this shot. So there he is. He's not really paying attention. I get a shot on him. He doesn't shoot, thank goodness. And instead of sitting there and maybe trading with him with an aware bandit, I'm going to go ahead and turn around, and I'm making a run for it, because that's one of the 3, right? So I expect the other 2 to pretty quickly, well, as quickly as Churchills will move anyway, start moving up, and that lets me think that I can get away before they show up. Now the M4 decides to stay, so I'm going to leverage that. To some extent, this is the meat shield technique. I have fallen back. I'm expecting him to get some lights, and I may get some shots. And then I notice that, oh my gosh, they're going to come down this long, narrow pathway and give me shots on them. There's that gun, just plain old misses. There we go. There's a shot. You're only taking 110 off of them at a time, so that's not going to be super useful. There's a bounce, even though I'm shooting gold. Pretty good armor on the T1 Heavy at this tier. There's a hit. And now what I'm worried about is guys showing up on my right, specifically that Panzer T-25, and hitting me in the side. But while I've still got shots here, I'll go ahead and take those. Working on the Matilda 4. There's a Hetzer in there. The Type has them kind of busy shooting at him, so I'm going to use that cover, the fact that they're worried about him. Looking for a shot on the Hetzer. Oh, there's that T-25. I knew he'd show up. Put a shot on him. And now I've got to back up. So this is just a hold the line moment. The P.43 and the Churchill have gone through. The big fight in the Abbey looks like we're about to win it. And now for me, it is just plain old time to start moving on. I get a shot into him. I block one of his shots, which had to surprise him. Now I'll keep on backing up. I don't want to stay there because if all of them come around the corner at once, I'm pretty much done. I need to get as hold down as I can. Unfortunately, I'm on this right side of the entrance here, which is not really where I want to be. I wish I was on the left side. They're missing a lot. That's helpful. I miss. I miss again. There's a couple hits. I finally take some. I get some heat shot at me. That's all right because I'm spamming gold myself. There's a B1 there. Not a lot of pin on that dude. The Hetzer's the one I'm worried about. I really want to kill him if I can. I end up bouncing the Hetzer shot. Oh, that guy's come up and exposed himself. There we go. I get the Hetzer down. And there's a hammer below from the P.26. He gets his heat through me. I shoot the ground. There's another bounce. And they're really just letting me play my game right here. And that pretty good turret armor, especially at this tier, is doing pretty well for me. Actually get him down and dead. And the Matilda's coming up. He's a problem. I've run out of hold down capability right here. And I'm really just sitting here out in the open. Miss into the ground. Matilda's fire very quickly. So I'm going to have a lot of trouble with this guy. Oh, I get hit by the T1 from behind. I actually bounce it somehow, and then he takes me down with another shot. And they have driven around through the bottom. That's one of the reasons why I wish I had been over on this side. If I could have made that happen, it would have been much better. I would have covered up a little bit more on the dudes who went around the bottom there. We end up winning this game. I'm able to hold them off enough. The guys on the cap, the Churchill, my guys on the cap, are able to clean up that cap. And the two over here actually work over these guys, and a couple of these come back and end up winning the game. Or at least cleaning up. The game was won by then anyway. But there you go, another example. 855 bounced in that case. And not necessarily just plain old lucky bounces like that big old AP shell that I bounced from the KV2 in the last game. But multiple shots going at me, pretty good turret armor, a decent hold down fighter. Again, at tier against a lot of lower tiers. You'll see that once they pressed 2, they started to butter the turret right there with the heat and that kind of thing. But interesting tank with the armor. I don't think you would say, all right, this is an armored behemoth, but it does give you some capabilities in hold down fighting, excuse me, and side scraping that will surprise people until they get used to it anyway. Realize they just press 2 and down it goes, that kind of thing. And remember, the gun is wonky. Gun is wonky. Alright guys, that is it for the P.43 Tier 5 Italian medium tank. Overall, what do I think of it? It's a Tier 5 medium tank. The armor gimmick is interesting. It can be useful at tier and lower tiers. I wouldn't rely on it. It will surprise people on occasion who are looking at a medium. I would say it's a heavium at tier 5, but of course once it starts seeing tier 6 and especially tier 7s, any +2 tank is probably going to shred 2 tiers below no matter how you slice it. But when you use armor as a balance as opposed to the gun or the stats on the gun or maybe the speed, then because of the 2-tier system, armor falls down much faster than speed or gun handling does as far as dealing with tiers above, just based on the way the game is designed. But it's not a painful grind, especially once it is 100% upgraded. As I said, I did not start from 0 on it as far as upgrading goes. Any tank that you're going to grind through the entire upgrade is going to be painful. So we're only talking about the 100% tank right here. And I won't say that it's a pub star, get one and go stomp pubs at tier 5, but it's not a bad medium, right on par with the rest of them, with a gimmick of a little bit of armor, and you're going to pay for that with some reduction in speed. Alright guys, hope you liked what you saw there. If you did, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I will soon have a review of the tier 6. As soon as I get that together, I'll post that as well, and we'll move on through the rest of them as usual. And as always, we will see ya.